On the 4th of April, 2025, a single announcement out of Beijing froze factory floors on the other side of the planet. China's government added 7 rare earth elements and the powerful magnets made from them to its export control list. From that date, any company that wanted to buy them had to apply to Beijing for a license, filing paperwork that sometimes ran to hundreds of pages, and then wait. Within weeks, exports of rare earth magnets out of China had roughly halved, thousands of miles away. The effect was immediate and brutal. Carmakers in the United States and Europe began warning that they would have to slow their line. In India, automakers said they had received no licenses at all and would have to stop building cars in early June. These are not obscure materials. A modern car contains rare earth magnets in its motors, its sensors, its speakers, its power steering, its seatbelts. A fighter jet cannot be built without them. With one piece of paper, the country that controls them had shown it could reach across the world and turn the machines off. Here is the part that should stop you. There is no shortage of rare earths in the ground. They are not actually rare. The United States has a world-class deposit sitting in the California desert, mined for decades. The problem was never the mine. You would think that owning a rare earth mine in a world this desperate for what it produces would be a license to print money. It is one of the most treacherous businesses in all of mining, and the reason why is one of the strangest facts in the global economy. By the end of this video, you will know what a rare earth mine actually costs, where the money really comes from, why the country with the biggest mine can still be held hostage by another country's factories, and why the rock coming out of the ground is very nearly the least valuable part of the whole business. The buy-in. Start with the word, because it is a lie that has cost investors billions. Rare earths are not rare. They are a family of 17 metallic elements, and most of them are more common in the Earth's crust than gold, silver, or lead. Neodymium, the star of the group, is roughly as abundant as copper. You could find traces of rare earths in the dirt of your own backyard. Scarcity in the ground is not the problem, and it never has been. So, what are you actually buying when you buy a rare earth mine? You are buying rock in which these elements are mixed together in tiny concentrations, bonded to each other so tightly that separating them is one of the hardest industrial problems humans have ever faced. Their value was never in finding them. It is in pulling them apart. Mining itself is almost ordinary. You dig ore, you crush it, you concentrate it into a powder called rare earth concentrate. This part costs what any mine costs, tens to hundreds of millions of dollars to build and run. If that were the whole business, rare earths would be easy. But that concentrate is nearly worthless as it sits. It is a mixed bag of 17 chemically similar elements, and nobody wants the bag. They want the individual elements purified. Neodymium and praseodymium for magnets. Dysprosium and terbium to make those magnets survive high heat. To get from the mixed bag to the pure element, you need the second business, the one that actually matters. You need separation. Separation is a monster. What you inherit. You inherit a chemistry problem that has bankrupted almost everyone who has ever tried to solve it outside of China. Because rare earth elements are so chemically alike, you cannot melt them apart or filter them. You have to use a process called solvent extraction, where the concentrate is dissolved and passed through hundreds of stages of chemical tanks called mixer settlers, each one nudging the mix a tiny fraction closer to pure. Picture a chain of hundreds of connected vats running continuously, using enormous volumes of acids and solvents, tuned with a precision that takes years of hard-won knowledge to get right. This is not mining. This is a vast, dangerous, unglamorous chemical plant, and it is the real asset. You also inherit radioactivity. Rare earth ore very often contains thorium and uranium mixed right in with the valuable elements. That means your waste stream is mildly radioactive, and disposing of it legally in the United States or Europe is expensive, slow, and politically radioactive in its own right. This single fact, the radioactive waste, is one of the biggest reasons the West let this entire industry drift to China in the first place. China was willing to bear the environmental cost. The West was not. You also inherit the deepest problem of all, the one hiding underneath the other two. Even if you build the mine, and even if you somehow build the separation plant, you still may not have anywhere to turn your pure oxides into finished magnets, because the factories that do that and the recipes they use are overwhelmingly in one country. So you inherit a chain with 3 links: the mine, the separation plant, and the magnet factory. For decades, the West owned only the first link and shipped the prize straight to the country that owned the other two. Now, let us look at where the money actually lives along that chain. The revenue layers. Number one is the raw concentrate, and it is a trap dressed as a revenue stream. You can sell your mixed rare earth concentrate to whoever will refine it. For years, that meant selling it to China. This brings in cash, but it is the lowest value link in the entire chain. You are handing away the rock and letting someone else capture the real profit. It looks like a business. It is closer to being a supplier to your own competitor. Number two is separated oxides, and this is where the real money begins. Once you can separate your concentrate into pure neodymium and praseodymium oxide, the value multiplies. This is the compound the whole magnet industry actually wants, and only a handful of companies outside China can make it at scale. This jump from selling concentrate to selling separated oxide is the single most important step a rare earth owner can take. Number three is metals and magnets, the top of the chain. Turn that oxide into metal, then into the finished neodymium iron boron magnets that spin inside every electric motor, and you have finally captured the value that China has hoarded for 30 years. This is the promised land of the industry, and almost nobody outside China has reached it until very recently. Number four is the government itself, as a customer and a backer. Because these materials are strategic, defense departments and governments will pay premiums, guarantee prices, and fund plans just to have a supply that does not run through a rival power. In this industry, national security is a revenue line, and it may be the most reliable one of all. Listen to that again. Here is a fact that captures the entire absurdity of this business. For most of its recent history, America's only rare earth mine, Mountain Pass in California, earned more than 95% of its revenue by selling its rare earth concentrate to a single main customer in China. Read that again slowly. The one mine that was supposed to make the United States independent of China was, in fact, digging up American rock and shipping it to China to be refined because America had no plant of its own that could separate it. The mine and the enemy were the same supply chain. Listen to that again. You can own the deposit, the trucks, the crushers, the whole mine, and still be completely dependent on the very country you are trying to break free from. Because the hard part, the separation, happens somewhere else. The rock in the ground was American. The value was Chinese. The gap between those two facts is the entire reason this industry exists as a battlefield and not just a business. It also tells you exactly what a rare earth mine really is. It is not a mine with a chemical plant attached. It is a chemical plant with a mine attached. Whoever owns the chemistry owns the metal. Everyone else just owns dirt. Now look at the bill for trying to own that chemistry. The ledger. Mining is the cheap part, so we move past it quickly. Digging and crushing ore is well understood, and it is not where the money goes. The separation plant is where the fortune is spent, building hundreds of stages of solvent extraction, with the acids, the solvents, the tanks, the controls, and the safety systems, costs many hundreds of millions of dollars, and getting it to actually run at high purity can take years of trial and error, even after it is built. Companies have poured money into these plants only to watch them underperform, producing oxide that is not pure enough to sell at a premium. Then the chemicals themselves, consumed continuously. Solvent extraction drinks enormous quantities of acid and reagents, day after day, a permanent operating cost that dwarfs anything in the mining stage. Then the waste, especially the radioactive waste. You must handle, store, and dispose of thorium-bearing residue under strict regulation. In the West, this is a major, ongoing, and politically fraught expense. Ignore it or handle it badly, and your plant can be shut down entirely. Then energy, because running hundreds of chemical stages and high-temperature furnaces to make metal is deeply power-hungry. Then the magnet factory, if you dare to build one, an entirely separate industrial operation with its own furnaces, its own presses, and its own guarded recipes, most of which were perfected in China over decades. Underneath all of it sits the killer. Your product's price is set largely by China, which can flood the market and crush prices the moment a Western rival looks like it might succeed. So you are spending fortunes to build the hardest chemical plant in industry, while the dominant player can lower the price at will and bankrupt you before you ever find your feet. That is not a normal cost. That is a competitor who can reach into your income statement whenever it chooses. The trap. Here is the trap, and it has caught nearly every rare earth dreamer for 30 years. Everyone looks at China's dominance, sees the sky-high strategic value, and rushes to open a mine. A mine is visible. A mine is fundable. A mine makes a great press release. So the money floods into digging rock out of the ground. But the rock is the easy 20%. The separation and the magnets are the brutal 80%, and they are slow, toxic, capital, hungry, and protected by decades of Chinese process knowledge that no one will sell you. So you end up with a beautiful mine and no way to turn its output into anything valuable, which leaves you exactly one customer for your concentrate, China. Watch the jaws close. You raise money on the strategic story. You build the mine because it is the part you know how to build. You produce concentrate. And then you discover you must sell it to the very country you were funded to compete with at prices that country controls, while you try and fail to build the separation plant that would set you free. You are not competing with China. You are feeding it and paying for the privilege. But if you do somehow start to succeed, to build the plant, to make the oxide, China can drop its prices until your plant loses money on every kilogram, wait for you to go bankrupt, and buy your assets for pennies. It has happened before. It is the single most important pattern in this industry. That is the trap in one sentence. The mine is a trap that funds your rival, and the escape route, the chemistry, is guarded by the rival you are funding. To understand how the West fell into this trap so completely, you have to go back to a mountain in the Mojave Desert, and a mistake made with a Geiger counter. The history digression. In 1949, prospectors were combing the mountains of Southern California, hunting for uranium in the early years of the atomic age, their Geiger counters clicking for radioactivity. At a place called Mountain Pass, the counters went wild. They had found something intensely radioactive, and for a moment they must have thought they had struck uranium. They had not. The radioactivity came from thorium, and the thorium was mixed into one of the richest rare earth deposits ever found on Earth. They had gone looking for the fuel of the atomic bomb, and stumbled onto the future engine of the entire electronics age. And at the time, almost nobody understood what they had. For years, the deposit sat quietly. Then the world changed. Color televisions arrived, and they needed a rare earth called europium to make the color red glow on the screen. Suddenly, Mountain Pass was the most important mine in the world. Through the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, it supplied most of the planet's rare earths. The Cold War, in part, ran on what came out of that California ground. Then two things happened. The magnet was invented, the neodymium iron-boron magnet in the 1980s, the strongest permanent magnet ever made, and it turned rare earths from a niche curiosity into the beating heart of modern motors, hard drives, missiles, and eventually electric cars. Demand was about to explode. At the very same moment, China began to move. It had large deposits, cheap labor, and crucially, a willingness to bear the environmental cost of separation that the West had lost its stomach for. Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping is often quoted as saying that the Middle East had oil and China had rare earths. Beijing understood the value of the whole chain, and it played a 30-year game to own it. The West saw a dirty, low-margin mining business and happily let it go. China saw the choke point of the future and seized it. Mountain Pass teaches the lesson of the whole industry. That deposit was never the prize. The prize was the will to build and run the ugly, poisonous, difficult chemistry that turns the deposit into magnets. The West had the rock and gave away the chemistry. It is still trying to buy it back. The death spiral case. Now, walk the fall of the company that tried to take Mountain Pass back and shows every jaw of the trap closing at once. Its name was Molycorp. In the late 2000s, with rare earth prices climbing and China tightening its exports, Molycorp reopened the Mountain Pass mine, promising to rebuild an American rare earth industry from the ground up. That story was irresistible. In 2010, after China cut its export quotas and prices spiked to extraordinary highs, Molycorp went public in a blaze of optimism, its stock soaring, its future apparently guaranteed by the strategic panic of the moment. Then it tried to do the hard part. Molycorp poured enormous sums, an investment approaching $1.5 to $2 billion, into building modern separation and processing at Mountain Pass, trying to become a fully integrated Western champion. This was the right dream. It was also brutally difficult, and the timing was about to turn lethal. Watch the spiral. That plant was harder to run than anyone admitted, and struggled to produce separated product at the cost and purity needed. At the same time, China opened its taps, and rare earth prices collapsed from their 2010 peak, falling and falling until the strategic panic that had funded Molycorp evaporated. Molycorp was now a high-cost Western producer trying to survive in a market whose price was set by a low-cost rival that wanted it dead. Molycorp was burning cash it could not replace, servicing debt it had taken on at the top, selling product for less than it cost to make. In 2015, One of the most hyped mining companies in America filed for bankruptcy. 1 year later, the Mountain Pass mine, the crown jewel of American rare earths, went dark and closed. Its rock was still there, as rich as ever. What had failed was everything downstream of the rock. In 2017, a new group bought the entire Mountain Pass property out of bankruptcy for around $20 million, a tiny fraction of the roughly $2 billion Molycorp had sunk into it. The mine that was supposed to free America from China had instead proven, in the most expensive way possible, exactly how deep the trap really was. The survivors. The survivors learned the one lesson Molycorp died teaching. You do not own a rare earth business until you own the chemistry. MP Materials, the company that bought Mountain Pass, restarted the mine, but it did something Molycorp never managed to finish. It moved deliberately down the chain. For a while, yes, it still shipped concentrate to China, earning most of its revenue exactly the old dependent way. But it used that cash to build separation at home, and then began making separated neodymium and praseodymium oxide itself. And then, in a plant in Texas, started building the finished magnets, aiming to complete the whole chain on American soil for the first time in decades. Then the world handed it a moment. When China imposed its export controls in 2025, MP Materials stopped shipping its concentrate to China entirely, and the United States government stepped in as a backer, taking a major stake, guaranteeing a floor price for its key oxide of $110 a kilogram, so that China could never again crush the price to kill it, and committing to buy its magnets. That government became the shield against the exact weapon that had destroyed Molycorp. Big customers followed, with a carmaker and a technology giant signing on to secure supply. Across the world, the other survivor, an Australian company mining a very high-grade deposit and refining it in Malaysia, followed the same rule. Own the separation, not just the mine. Both survivors succeeded for the same reason. They stopped thinking of themselves as miners and started thinking of themselves as chemists who happened to own a mine. These habits are simple to say and brutal to do. Build the separation plant, whatever it costs. Secure a customer or a government that will hold your price above China's reach. Handle the radioactive waste properly so you are never shut down. And never ever believe that owning the rock is the same as owning the business. The verdict. Does this actually work? It finally can, but only under conditions that did not exist for 30 years. If you own the whole chain, the mine, the separation, and the magnets, and you have a government or a giant customer guaranteeing your price above the level China can weaponize, then a rare earth business becomes something close to a fortress, sitting on materials the modern world cannot function without, protected from the one competitor that could kill you. That is a powerful position, and for the first time, a small number of Western players are reaching it. But be honest about what it takes. You are not buying a mine. You are committing to build the hardest chemical plant in heavy industry, to handle radioactive waste for decades, to master separation knowledge that one country spent 30 years hoarding, and to survive a rival that can drop your product's price to zero the day you look dangerous. Without a government at your back, that fight is very close to unwinnable, and the wreckage of everyone who tried it alone is the proof. Get it right, own the chemistry, and hold a protected price, and you own a choke point of the entire modern economy, from electric cars to guided missiles. Get it wrong. Build only the mine and trust the market, and you become Molycorp, a rich deposit and a beautiful dream, beating the very rival that will bury you, bankrupt inside 5 years with the rock still sitting there untouched. You never really owned the rare earths. They were always there, common as copper, waiting in the rock. What you were actually fighting to own was the poisonous, patient, fiendishly difficult art of pulling them apart, and until the day you owned that, every ton you dug belonged, in the end, to whoever could separate it.